achieved.
Welcome back to Kamikaze Overdrive MMA Predictions. As always, I am your host, Scott Johnson, and on this episode of the show, we're taking a look at the upcoming UFC 158 St-Pierre versus Diaz card, which will take place on March 16th. My 5 main card predictions will be given to you on this show. My 7 preliminary breakdowns will be available over at kamikazeoverdrive.net. Also on the website, you can go to the public pick section and check out who the public's backing and make your own predictions as well. The panel stops by with all of their predictions, and you can check out my bet packs, and I'll be adding a new feature to the bet packs called the Best Bet, which I'll give you my best pick for every single fight. It could be a prop bet, it could be straight up winner, but you'll be able to see what my best pick is for every single fight on the card. I also encourage you to check out, right now Josh Harper's been doing the Bellator predictions for my website, and he's doing a fantastic job, so please check them out. They're usually posted either Wednesday or Thursday morning, the day of the event, so please check them out, as well as I'm looking for someone to do Invicta FC predictions, so if you're interested, please hit me up at Kamikaze Overdrive at live.ca, send me an email, and let me know, and we'll discuss the details, and we'll go further into that. So certainly if you're interested in doing Invicta FC, let me know. Before getting into my predictions, thank you very much to all of my sponsors, MMABettingOdds.com, WalkoutWear.com, MMACrips.com, the Adrenaline Training Center, HeartandGlory.com, BoneSnapper.com, Fantasy MMA HQ, and so on and so forth down the list. All of those websites, the links are available in the description of the video or on the website. 5 fights, some very good matchups. Let's get to the first prediction. So our first prediction is going to take place in the UFC's lightweight division as Mike the Martian Ricci, 8-3-0, takes on Colin the Freak Show Fletcher, 9-2-0. Ricci's coming off a loss to Colton Smith in the finals of the Ultimate Fighter 16, while Colin Fletcher lost to Norman Park in the finals of the Tough Smashes tournament. Now, Fletcher, as I said, went to the finals. He competed in the lightweight division. Ricci actually went up and competed at 170, so he's returning to the lightweight where he's much more suited physically. But then Fletcher was a welterweight as well, and he's a very tall individual. And actually, it's interesting to note in this fight, usually Fletcher has some significant physical advantages. He's 6'2", which is very big for a lightweight, but Ricci is 6 foot tall, and Ricci only has a 2-inch reach disadvantage, so he's going to be almost able to match Fletcher's advantages. We'll see how that plays out in this fight. Ricci's professional losses, major ones, are coming against Pat Kern and Darren Cruickshank, and he has a win over Jordan Mean, which is very impressive. He trains at a TriStar, so he's got a very good camp behind him. Fletcher's biggest wins coming in the Bama stage back in his career prior to competing in the Ultimate Fighter. Now, Colin Fletcher, 7 of 8 wins by submission, and he's a grappler, but he lost the finals against Norman Park on the basis of grappling. It was taken down 6 times on 9 attempts. And you look at Ricci, though, and the same thing, he lost to Colton Smith because his grappling defense was not up to par, getting taken down 7 times on 16 attempts by Colton Smith. Fletcher's very active off his back with his long legs and hips versus Park, but he was still on his back in that fight, and that's something I expect to see a little bit in this matchup as well. As I said, he has long legs, will attack with submissions, sweeps, and reversals, but he relies mainly on his opponent for takedowns, and against Norman Park, he really struggled with his wrestling because he could not dictate the pace of the grappling exchanges. His striking is relatively basic. He will throw a lot of kicks, low body, and likes to mix in a push, and he'll mix in some spinning attacks, but he looks a little awkward on the feet and unsettled. He used the clinch against Park kind of effectively, likes to tie up and attack, but again, he was getting taken down from that position. He'll have to be very careful of that against Mike Ricci. Now, Ricci, 4 of his 7 wins have come by knockout. He does a nice job of mixing up his punches and kicks. On the show, he stopped Neil Magny with a brutal elbow strike along the cage, which was very impressive. He does a nice job of managing the range well, and he did this against Magny, who has a very long reach, longer than his opponent in this fight, and he caught him with the left hand leading into that. He also will take the fight to the ground with a nice double leg, smothering top control, will use transitions, and beat up Corey Hill with some solid ground and pound. I believe that was in the quarterfinals as well. Again, he struggled against Colton with the grappling, but I think he was a little undersized and wasn't as strong, and I think that will show up here, especially when he's fighting at lightweight, where he'll be a bit more suited. Fletcher needs to use his reach, get the fight to the ground to attack with subs and sweeps, but he seems to make a lot of positional mistakes, and it's going to cost him in the long run. On the other hand, Ricci needs to use his speed, get inside, outstrike Fletcher, mix it up with his takedowns, but keep tight on top to avoid getting swept or submitted. And my prediction in this fight is Mike Ricci to defeat Colin Fletcher by TKO. In the UFC's middleweight division, Nick the Promise Ring, 13-1-0, battles Chris Camozzi, 18-5-0. Camozzi has won 3 fights in a row, while Nick Ring is coming off a win over Court McGee at UFC 149. 9. Now, both these guys, well-versed fighters. Camozzi's a purple belt, a BJJ purple belt, while Nick Ring a brown belt, so both talented on the ground. Ring 6 wins by submission, and Camozzi also has 6 wins by submission on the ground, but a little edge to Camozzi with his ability to finish guys, standing 5 knockout victories compared to Ring's 2. Now, Chris has been submitted 3 times on the ground. That's something he'll have to keep aware of if he does go to the mat with Ring in a poor position. Physically, a nice edge for Camozzi in this fight. 6'3" to Ring, 6 feet tall, and he's going to have an 1.5 inches of reach on him as well during the striking exchanges. Now, Nick Ring has a Muay Thai background, a very kick-heavy attack. He likes to brutalize his opponent's outside leg, go to the body, mix in a nice push kick. On the feet, he'll go with a 1-2 combo, using mainly hooks, and he likes that Thai plum with the knee strikes if he can get inside and control his opponent. That could prove difficult against a guy like Chris Camozzi, who is so tall. Now, he showed excellent movement against Tim Boetsch in that fight early on, at least laterally moving nicely, but he does tend to take a lot of damage, and he was hit by Tim Boetsch in that fight when Boetsch started walking him down and brawling with him. And Court McGee had a lot of success doing damage when he was cutting off the cage against Ring and forcing his back up against the wall. In both those fights, he faded, which is something to keep in mind in a grueling matchup like this could very well be. When he fought Ricky Fukuda, he struggled with the takedowns in the top game of Fukuda. I think speed was a major issue there. But Head will go offensively with his grappling. He does a nice job of punching and jumping on a single leg. He did that against James Head. Multiple takedowns in that fight and really used his advantage well. Now, Chris Camozzi, a very durable and tough guy to finish. He looked very good against Conde in his last fight. Every time his opponent came forward, he hit him with 2-3 punches and really backed him off effectively. He has a nice stepping knee. We saw that in his last fight. We also saw that against Nick Cote, where he cut him and ended up forcing the fight to stop as a result of the cut. And against Cote, he did an excellent job cutting off his opponent and forcing him to fight with his back off the cage, which he will need to do in this fight. Now, when he fought Francis Carmont, he was getting beaten up badly by the very big and physically strong Carmont. Now, Camozzi has won some fights that are over questionable competition, some guys that just aren't on that level. On the other hand, Nick Ring, he's won some fights that were very close. A lot of people felt could have gone the other way, most notably against Court McGee and Ricky Fukuda. Now, Camozzi needs to use his size and grind on Ring along the cage and do damage ASAP and really take Ring's movement and speed out of this fight. For Ring, he needs to use his movement and distance, but mix in takedowns if he can get Camozzi to the ground and keep him there. Now, Ring takes a lot of damage and tends to wear down in fights, and the size and physicality of Camozzi is going to be an issue for him and is going to expose that. And I think this fight's going to go to the judges, and my prediction is Chris Camozzi to win a very close decision, which tend to go Nick Ring's way, but I'll take Chris Camozzi to defeat Nick Ring by decision. In our first of 3 main card welterweight matchups, Jake the Juggernaut Ellenberger 28-6-0 battles 35-11-2 Nate the Great Marquardt. Jake Ellenberger coming off a win over Jay Haran, while Nate Marquardt, his last appearance, he dropped his Strikeforce welterweight title to Tarek Safadine. Now, first thing I want to look at here is the slight physical edge for Marquardt. He's a former middleweight and a very big man, and we'll see how that plays out against Jake Ellenberger. Both guys have submission and KO finishing capabilities. Ellenberger more with the knockouts, Marquardt more with the submissions, but both can mix it up. Ellenberger, an NCAA Division II wrestler and purple belt, versus Marquardt, who's a second-degree black belt in both BJJ and pancration, so very talented on the ground. Both guys very capable. Now, the takedown defense, Ellenberger 93% and Marquardt 73%, both very impressive. And their defensive grappling could very well negate their offensive grappling and force us into a primarily striking-based contest. Now, Jake manages the distance very well, moving in and out. We saw this against Diego Sanchez, and he countered effectively. But against Jay Haran, he used a similar game plan, but I thought he was a little too tentative and a little too inactive in that fight, where anything that Haran could have done could have changed that fight in an instant. He doesn't throw a lot of kicks, mostly relying on his boxing. He will use knees. He clipped Sanchez with a knee, and we saw him stop Jake Shields with knees in the clinch as well. Now, when he fought Martin Kam, he floored him while rushing forward with a left hook, but he had a tendency to swing a little bit wildly in that fight and get a little over-aggressive, and we saw him that cost him ultimately before that matchup was done. Now, he isn't as effective when he's being pressured, and that's something we saw Nate Marquardt do more of against Tyron Woodley in his when he won the Strikeforce title. And similarly, Ellenberger was under attack from Campman to start the second round, had his back against the cage, and that eventually led to the finish of that fight. Now, his grappling, again, I said very strong, power double, good takedown, good timing on his takedowns. Showed against Haran, he can defend the takedowns very effectively. Now, as I said, Marquardt, very big fighter. His size played and it had an impact on Woodley, did a lot of damage with his power. He uses a lot of feints, which could make it hard for Ellenberger to counter and time him. One thing Marquardt does a lot of, he likes to paw with his left hand and throw a power right, but he needs to mix it up a little bit. and mix in his leg kicks, which are very dangerous when he does use them. He did an effective job of keeping Woodley's back on the cage, and if he does this against Ellenberger, it will limit his movement. He finished Woodley with a brutal elbow along the cage, which was very impressive, but he was clipped a couple of times by the right hand of Woodley, and he was eaten up by the leg kicks of Safadine, so I question his defensive his fighting. He needs to make sure he doesn't get into too many repetitions and too many patterns that his opponents can pick up on and capitalize on. When he fought Yushin Okami, he was able to put Okami on his back, and Okami's a huge middleweight, did the same against Woodley, and we'll see if he tries that against Ellenberger. I don't know how effective that'll be. Now, both guys are less effective when under pressure. Ellenberger, as I said, has been trying to be a counter striker and move more against Sanchez and Kampmann, while Marquardt has been far more aggressive in his two welterweight bouts than when we saw him fighting at 185 pounds. Both guys have serious power, and neither one has an ironclad chin. We've both seen them rocked in the past. Now, as long as Marquardt can avoid getting tagged under pressure, his pressure, physical advantage, and conditioning will give him an edge in this fight, and I like Nate Marquardt, the underdog, to defeat Jake Ellenberger by TKO. In the co-main event of the evening, the natural-born killer Carlos Condit, 28-6-0, battles the number one ranked UFC welterweight Johny Big Rig Hendricks, 14-1-0. Condit coming off the unification title fight loss to Georges St-Pierre, while Hendricks has won 5-0 and is coming off a 46-second knockout of Martin Kampmann. Now, Condit is a BJJ brown belt with a ton of fight experience. He's fought all over the world and is very impressive. Hendricks not as much fight experience, but he's an elite-level NCAA Division I wrestler, very highly touted, very well accomplished. Now, Hendricks in his career, for the most part, has faced wrestlers, guys like Mike Pierce, John Fitch, Rick Story, Charlie Brenneman. He got through a nice test in Martin Kampmann, even though it lasted less than a minute. He has devastating power, especially in his right hand, flash knockouts of Martin Kampmann, Amir Sadallah, and John Fitch. He will use some kicks, but he prefers boxing. One thing I picked up on I don't like that he does, he will move forward with 1 to 3 punches, and if they land, great, but if they don't, he stops and resets and takes the pressure off. Now, he will get a little bit wild, and he showed this against Josh Koscheck when he wasn't hitting him, and he has a tendency to move straight forward and chase when striking instead of cutting off and forcing his opponent to back up. Now, Koss was able to evade a lot of his strikes. Hendricks only landed 55 of 120 attempted strikes at 45%, which is still a good percentage, but you don't want to be swinging and missing, especially against a talented striker like Carlos Condit. Now, defensively in that fight, he got his back pinned along the cage against Koscheck and got smashed several times with some big shots, and he was having trouble in the same position with some high-volume flurries from Rick Story, so he needs to be careful there not to let Condit tee off on him. Now, he will work his takedowns for the most part along the cage. He doesn't have that powerful shot. He averages 4.59 takedowns per fight at 44%, so very impressive and can really change the pace of a matchup. Now, one thing I look at, he could be falling in love with his striking and getting away from his wrestling, which I think could be a mistake. He needs to keep things mixed up and keeps his opponent guessing. Now, when he fought TJ Grant, he had to rely heavily on his wrestling because Grant was eating him up with his Muay Thai striking, and even when he took Grant down, he was being neutralized off by Grant off his back, and that's something, again, against Condit, who's so good off his back. Now, Carlos is going to have a 5-inch reach advantage and a 5-inch height advantage, which could show up in the event these guys do stay standing. Now, I expect Condit to utilize a similar game plan to the Diaz fight, using range to short-circuit the power of Johny Hendricks. He was beating Diaz to the punch in that matchup, attack and move out of range, use angles very well, constantly keeping his opponent guessing as to where he'll be coming from. Now, when he moves away from Hendricks, it's either going to avoid contact altogether from Hendricks' shots, or at the very least, he'll be at the very end of the punches, and they won't have nearly as much power on them. He has a very good chin. He's never been knocked out, but he was dropped by the right hand of Jake Ellenberger, and again, Hendricks has the type of power to stop anyone's night. He throws nice combos, mixes in a variety of kicks. He really likes to use those knees, and he simply has more diversity striking-wise than Johny Hendricks. He likes powerful leg kicks, which could limit Hendricks' mobility and head movement when he's in close. Now, he was taken down several times by Rory McDonald, but he neutralized McDonald with his back, and when Dong Young Kim, a very strong grappler, took him down, he immediately swept Kim and went on the attack. One thing I like, too, with Condit, he trains at altitude, which should give him a conditioning edge in this matchup. Now, Hendricks, when you look at his fights that he's done, he's either knocked out his opponents, guys like Kampmann, Fitch, Wahlberger, and Brenneman and Sadallah, or he's had very close decision matchups against Grant, Story, Pierce, and Koscheck. And this is the type of fight you do not want to go to the judges, I don't think, with Condit, because I expect him to outpoint Johny Hendricks. Condit needs to avoid moving straight back, circle, and pick apart Hendricks at range with a greater variety of strikes and a higher volume of strikes. Stay at a range of that big shot, and I think he wins this. So my prediction is Carlos Condit to defeat Johny Hendricks by decision. And now it's time for our main event prediction of the evening, as the reigning UFC welterweight champion Georges St-Pierre, 23-2-0, battles the former Strikeforce champion Nick Diaz, 27-8-0. Georges St-Pierre is coming off as the aforementioned victory over Carlos Condit, and he is really on a roll. He has not lost since 2007 UFC 69 against Matt Serra. Nick Diaz coming off a loss to Carlos Condit on his side of things, and was suspended after that, so both guys fighting Condit in their last appearances. Now, Diaz has been out for over 13 months, which is something to take into consideration. Well, GSP, this is his second fight after a long layoff, so I expect a better performance than for him, and he had such a good performance against Condit in his return. Now, GSP, he's become very emotionally invested in this fight. He needs to remain smart, because Nick Diaz wants him off his game and wants him to be emotional and to get charged up for this fight. Now, St-Pierre, 9 wins by knockout, 5 by submission. He's been defeated once each by those methods, and he's 10-0 when he goes to the judges via decision. Now, Diaz, 13 wins by knockout, 8 by submission, 2 losses by knockout, 1 by submission. So both guys are capable of being stopped. Big number for Diaz, 6-6 in decisions. That's something to keep in mind. If this fight goes to the judges, St-Pierre usually has an edge. Both guys are black belts in BJJ, but it's Georges St-Pierre's wrestling that's on another level on the ground. Now, St-Pierre averages 4.3 takedowns per 15 minutes at a 78% completion rate. Even more impressively, 86% takedown defense, so I don't think Diaz is going to be going on the offensive with his grappling, at least taking him down. Diaz, 64% takedown defense, we'll have to see how that shows up. Now, Diaz, he subbed Evangelista Cyborg Santos off his back, which was very impressive. It shows how capable he is on the ground, but he's had trouble with powerful wrestlers in the past. And you look at the numbers St. Pierre has put up in past fights: 7 of 8 takedowns against Condit, 4 of 9 against Cote, 11 for 11 against Hardy, 10 for 12 against Thiago Alves, and 7 for 9 against John Fitch. So he's very capable of dominating this fight with his grappling, which many expect him to do. Now, St-Pierre, he busted Condit up with his ground and pound, postured up with some elbows and punches, and I expect something like that, a similar attack like that against Diaz here. Now, he couldn't finish Hardy with submission attempts, and he needs to avoid attempting things against Diaz because he could lose the position, and that could be a costly mistake against a guy like Diaz on the mat. Now, Nick, he is a high-volume striker, boxer, and very capable, but GSP has a wider variety of strikes, has that karate background, and will look to use his kicks to really set some distance between him and Nick. Now, Diaz, under Richard Perez, who's his boxing coach, has really improved and is really known for his high-volume striking. As I said, 6.03 strikes per minute compared to 3.71 for GSP, but St-Pierre only averages 1.19 strikes landed against in his fights, and Diaz, on the other hand, almost 3.5 strikes per minute where his opponent's able to tee off on him. That's a big difference, and that should show up in a long fight. Now, GSP's chin, is there issues there? We'll find out. He did get dropped by Condit, but he survived. Now, Nick likes to back guys down and pin them along the cage, does a nice job of changing levels and attacking the body, and the big question is, would GSP quit under pressure if Nick can corner him and start teeing off? Now, one thing Nick couldn't do was cut off Carlos Condit and get that pressure game underway. He's actually going to have a 2-inch reach disadvantage in this fight, which is something he's not used to having. Normally he's the longer fighter, and that's something George will have an edge in this fight. Diaz likes to use his conditioning as a weapon, which has helped him effectively in the past, but St. Pierre has excellent conditioning, and that should negate Diaz's normal advantage. Now, Nick has struggled with the game plan of Condit, and he didn't adjust, and GSP is the master of game plans, and I expect him to implement one that Diaz is going to have to deal with in this fight. One thing, one of GSP's coaches, Greg Jackson, has a ton of experience fighting Nick Diaz, both with Diego Sanchez and Carlos Condit facing Nick in the past, so he'll be ready to help GSP game plan for this matchup. If St. Pierre stands, he'll use a variety of strikes, kicks, likes to use the range, movement, and speed to take care of Nick in the striking area. On the ground, control and ground and pound is what he needs to look at. For Diaz, he needs to press forward, cut off the cage instead of chasing, land with volume, and bust George up as soon as possible. I expect GSP to either circle out or change levels for takedowns every time Diaz moves forward. Diaz does his best work in high volumes, not one-punch KO, which is the problem GSP has had within the past, and it's hard to land a lot of volume against a guy like Georges St-Pierre, like an athlete like Georges St-Pierre. Look for St-Pierre to control and on the ground and do damage on the mat, bust Diaz open ASAP, and my prediction is Georges St-Pierre to defeat Nick Diaz by TKO, potentially due to a cut, and retain his UFC welterweight title. So those are my 5 main card predictions for the UFC 158 event. All of my preliminary predictions will be available over at kamikazeoverdrive.net in written form. Also, the panel gives their predictions and breaks the fights down, and they've done an excellent job of late getting some very good predictions, some very accurate predictions. Josh Harper's Bellator predictions are always available every week leading up to those events. The public pick section is open. A lot of people picking there and voting, and please check out that. My bet packs will be ready to go and looking to make some profit for all the people interested in betting on this event. All of my sponsors are available as well. Thank you very much for tuning in. We've got a lot of MMA in the future coming up, and I look forward to it tremendously. Kamikaze Overdrive MMA predictions.